and I'm going to beg the indulgence of the witnesses as well. We do this. So I've received requests from a couple of our members to discuss an issue that is being sent to all members. It would be unfair to do this during our scheduled committee time to the witnesses that are coming before us today. So I've asked our clerk to put an in-camera link together for a 5 to 10 minute quick meeting after our session concludes today. So I'm looking to the members right now if there is consensus among members to be able to do that. So I look to the members to see. Members, I see MP Sido, if you can, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to having an extension of this meeting, I've already got something, it's Ramadan and it's the Ramadan iftar I've got to attend right after this meeting. So that won't work. I don't know if we're able to do it at a later date, but I obviously want to be respectful to the witnesses that are here with us today and respect their time.
Understood. I think that that is what is most important. So I don't think we have consensus members to be able to do that at this time. I don't want to take up more time in respect of the witnesses that are waiting to get started. Okay. So thank you, members. So welcome.
Just before we start, Mr. Chair, if I could test Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe very quickly.
Oui, mais mon greffier préféré, je suis désolé.
Yes, my preferred clerk. I had some little technical problems, but I don't think the sound will have any problems. So there you go. Is that all right? Hello, and hello, everyone, all the witnesses and all my colleagues from Parliament.
Mr. Chair, at your call. Mr. Chair, at your call.
Okay, we'll get started. So welcome, colleagues, to meeting number 19 of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. Today we meet to hear from witnesses for briefings on the situations in Turkey and northern Syria, followed by Colombia. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and address all comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds left in your questioning time, I'll signal you with this paper here. For our witnesses, interpretations available through a globe icon on the bottom of your screen in both official languages. Please note that screen captures or photos are not permitted. I now would like to welcome our witnesses for the first panel on Turkey and northern Syria. We have with us Ms. Neoline, Special Rapporteur, Special Procedures Branch at the Human Rights Office at the High Commissioner at the United Nations. We have Ms. Gladding, Director of Fragile and Humanitarian Programs at World Vision Canada. We have Farida Diff, Canada Director at Human Rights Watch. Taryn Russell, Head of Policy and Advocacy, and Amilcar Crowdy, Humanitarian Advisor from Save the Children Canada. Justin Mohammed, Human Rights Law and Policy Campaigner at Amnesty International Canada. And now we will we'll begin with opening statements, and we'll start with Professor Neoline. I now invite you to make your opening statement for up to 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, bonsoir.
Good evening.
The usual disclaimer that UN officials make at the beginning of such evidence, which is that my attendance before the Standing Committee is in my capacity as Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. I'm here to provide informal, unsworn oral briefing to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the framework of the discussion on Syria and Iraq, and nothing in my remarks should be construed as a waiver, express or implied, of the privileges or immunities of the United Nations, officials or experts, pursuant to the 1946 Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. Thank you. Let me make some generic remarks. As you know, the mandate I hold has been intimately engaged with the situation of civilians, particularly women and children who find themselves in northeast Syria, including a significant number of Canadian nationals. The mandate I hold, along with 15 other special procedure mechanisms of the United Nations, has issued a letter to 57 states, of whom Canada is one, who have their nationals currently held, women and children, in camps and in detention sites in northeast Syria. This list, in my view, is not a list that any state wants to be on, because it is a list that defines a set of obligations to individuals in this territory, and it defines the failure of states to live up to their international obligations. We have made clear in this letter that there are multiple and serious human rights violations taking place for your nationals, Canadian nationals, in the situation in northeast Syria. They include torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, including for Canadian children. They include the danger of and actual sexual and reproductive harm to women and to minors. They include arbitrary detention, risks to the right to life, freedom of movement restrictions, denial of the right to non-discrimination, the abrogation of the rights to education, health, clean and safe water. I have consistently affirmed the obligations of states, including Canada, to urgently repatriate their third country nationals. Let me be clear that other states are doing this. My mandate works closely with a large number of states who have, even throughout the COVID pandemic, worked to ensure the safe return of their nationals. With the exception of one minor child, an orphan, Canada has not been among those states making large-scale returns. I want to stress that your nationals are being held by non-state actors who have no legitimate basis to hold them. The situation is worsening in the camps. The mandate has, for example, been aware in the last 2 weeks of a significant military incursion in the camps, a clearing out, and another data and biometric data collecting exercise on persons held there. We remain deeply concerned about the gathering of information on third country nationals and the question of whom that data will be shared with. Let me make a couple of brief remarks about a group that have not had much attention in the camps: adolescent boys and young boys under the 18. It's particularly concerning to me that while our attention has been on females, men, girls, and mothers, that there are a sizable number of adolescent boys being held in prison facilities on what appears to me to be multiple spurious grounds. Some of these facilities, including for Canadian nationals, have been described as rehabilitation camps. I would unreservedly voice my concern at the use of this nomenclature. None of the children being held in these so-called rehabilitation sites have a legal basis to justify their detention. None have been legally representative. No best interest test has been applied to keep them there, and no child has meaningful exit from the camp unless Canada is prepared to take them back. There is an obligation, not just an obligation on human rights and moral grounds to return your women and children home, but also on security grounds. The long-term security of this region and of all states will only be secured when all the individuals in the camps are returned, or a safe process has been put in place for those who can't be returned on the basis of non refoulement. Security and human rights are the basis for return, and both are imperative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll move to Ms. Lindsay Gladding.
Thank you so much, Chair and members of the committee, for inviting us to contribute to today's briefing on the situation in Turkey and northern Syria. World Vision is a Christian relief development and advocacy organization working to create lasting change in the lives of children, families, and communities to overcome poverty and injustice. We work throughout the world in nearly 100 countries on the basis of need with no strings attached. Here in Canada, we're supported by a network of 650,000 individuals and partners, including churches and university clubs. The humanitarian consequences of a decade of fighting and displacement are clear. Humanitarian needs across Syria have risen by 20% since last year, with an estimated 13.4 million people in need of humanitarian assistance in 2021. The rights of Syrian girls and boys to be healthy, educated, protected, and empowered are being severely undermined. Cross-border humanitarian assistance is a vital lifeline in helping to ensure at minimum that Syrian children and families' right to humanitarian assistance is upheld. Children can be astoundingly resilient, but in Syria, they have faced more than 10 years of relentless injury, death, and destruction. As a result of a decade of war, they have lost their education, safety, family income, and their hope in a peaceful future. Children and their families live in constant fear of violence that threatens death or sexual assault, particularly against women and girls. World Vision's most recent assessment in Northwest Syria indicated that every single girl we spoke to lives with the fear of being sexually assaulted and raped. At least 1,435 schools and hospitals have been attacked, grave violations, preventing children from the most basic rights of healthcare and education. Children who survived the airstrikes, barrel bombs, ground attacks, and siege strategies consistently face an unsafe reality and an uncertain future. Of course, it's key to situate our response as well as the broader operational environment within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The financial and health impacts of COVID-19 on communities already impacted by the decades-long conflict are devastating, particularly for those living in displacements and refugee camps and collective shelters in areas with limited health care. An estimated 2.45 million girls and boys, or 1 in 3, were already out of school by the end of 2019. The COVID-19 crisis has pushed an additional 50% out of education in the north of the country, resulting in 2/3 of children being out of school in northern Syria. Sadly, we know, of course, that girls are least likely to attend or return to school. The Government of Canada is an important partner for our work in Syria, and we appreciate the financial commitments made to the Syria crisis in the recent budget. Our Canadian grants in northwestern Syria have focused on providing life-saving protection, health, water, and sanitation. But I really want to stress the importance of dedicating sufficient funds to address the staggering humanitarian needs and ensuring the protection of children's rights. I'd like to turn our attention to the important issue of cross-border humanitarian operations between Turkey and Syria. The ability to provide cross-border assistance in Syria, initially through UN Security Council Resolution 2165 in 2014, and its subsequent renewals, has been a vital lifeline to millions of people in Syria. It's allowed organizations like ours to reach people in spite of continued fighting and insecurity, as well as severe access constraints, and has enabled humanitarian actors to ensure that those most in need are reached with assistance in a direct, safe, sustained, and timely manner. The scale of these operations is massive. Last year alone, the cross-border response allowed humanitarian actors to reach over 2.4 million people a month with life-saving food, nutrition, assistance, education, and critical medical supplies. Extended authorization of these operations by the UN Security Council is critical to support a pandemic response, including vaccinations in northwest Syria, where the first shipment of vaccines was received on April 22nd. It is deeply concerning that over the past years, the number of border crossings available to humanitarian organizations have steadily decreased, placing additional constraints on humanitarian operations. So let me conclude with 2 quick recommendations. We urge the Government of Canada, through its permanent missions in New York and Geneva, as well as the ministerial level, to continue to strongly advocate for a timely and unrestricted renewal of cross-border authorization. And we encourage Global Affairs Canada to make multi-year funding the expectation rather than the exception, providing the greatest flexibility for organizations like ours to have meaningful partnerships with local organizations. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Ms. Farida Daif for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and honorable members of Parliament, for inviting me to appear before this subcommittee. I will focus my remarks today on the humanitarian crisis in northeast Syria, given the gravity of the human rights abuses on the ground and the urgent need for this government to address the plight of Canadians trapped there. As you know, 10 years of conflict have decimated Syria's infrastructure and social services, resulting in massive humanitarian needs and making millions reliant on aid, including many of the roughly 2 million people living in northeast Syria in areas under the control of the Kurdish-led Autonomous Administration, the region's de facto government. While much of the population doesn't have sufficient access to services, including healthcare, water, sanitation, and shelter, the UN Security Council has unfortunately failed to maintain critical cross-border aid systems for northeast Syria, making a desperate situation worse. Lest we think this is a problem thousands of miles away that doesn't acutely affect Canadians, it's important for the subcommittee to recognize that dozens of Canadians, mostly children, remain detained in these life-threatening conditions amid growing insecurity, shortages of vital aid, and a deadly global pandemic. These Canadians were detained by the Kurdish-led authorities 2 years ago after the fall of the Islamic State's so-called caliphate. The detainees include roughly 45 Canadians, 8 men, 13 women, and 24 children, most of whom are under the age of 6. The indefinite detention of these Canadians without being brought before a judge to review the legality and necessity of their detention is both arbitrary and unlawful. The detention of Canadian women and children solely because of their ties to male ISIS suspects amounts to guilt by association and collective punishment prohibited under international law. The conditions in the northeast Syrian camps and prisons holding these Canadians are life-threatening. According to humanitarian groups, more than 700 detainees in El Hol and Roche camp, at least half of them children, have died in the past 2 years. The illness, filth, and overcrowding in these prisons and camps have created a prime environment for the spread of COVID-19 and are increasing the despair of detainees and their families. To be clear, these Canadians have no hope of leaving the detention camps and prisons of northeast Syria without this government's intervention. Canada holds the keys to their release. But thus far, this government has consistently turned a blind eye, recycling the same excuses again and again to justify an unwillingness to spend political capital to repatriate Canadians with suspected ISIS ties. There is no repatriation plan for this specific group of Canadians. Consular officials have had little to no direct contact with detainees, much less lifted a finger to improve the conditions of their detention. Nor has Canada helped verify citizenship for any of the detained children born in Syria to Canadian parents, leaving them effectively stateless. Despite the Kurdish authorities pleading with states to repatriate their nationals, Canada has only brought home 2 Canadian children, a 5-year-old orphan and another young child in March, whose Canadian mother remains detained. While Canada may have obtained the mother's consent to repatriate her child alone, Human Rights Watch questions whether consent can be informed and voluntary for women indefinitely detained with no access to redress or counsel. For over 2 years, Canada has flouted its international legal obligations to intervene when citizens abroad face serious abuses, including risks to life, torture, and inhuman and degrading treatment. The growing humanitarian crisis and the indefinite detention in appalling conditions of these Canadians make piecemeal returns untenable. All of these Canadians have the right to adequate food, water, clothing, shelter, mental and physical health, and fair trials. The children have the right to an education. Repatriation also makes sense from a security standpoint. Orderly returns allow Canada to conduct individual assessments of each returnee, monitor them as appropriate, and prosecute those who may have committed crimes, a critical step in redress for thousands of ISIS victims. In closing, I appeal to members of the subcommittee to urge this government to repatriate, as a matter of urgency, all Canadians detained in northeast Syria. Adult guardians should be brought home with their children, absent compelling evidence that separation is in the best interest of the child. Pending repatriations, Canada should immediately increase consular assistance to detain Canadian citizens.
Thank you. You'll have an opportunity during questions. We'll now move to Ms. Taryn Russell for 5 minutes.
You. My colleague will give our remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Amilcar Crowdy, humanitarian advisor at Save the Children Canada. I am here with my colleague, Taryn Russell, Head of Policy and Advocacy. My comments today will be through the lens of Save the Children's experience, working to address children's needs and rights in humanitarian and development settings for more than 100 years. Every year, Save the Children responds to close to 80 emergencies across 120 countries. We have been working to reach children affected by the war in Syria since 2012. We provide emergency and life-saving support combined with early recovery activities that help restore basic services for children and their families. We welcome this opportunity to brief you on our key concerns for children in northern Syria and Turkey based on our work in this region. The Syrian crisis for us is fundamentally, first and foremost, a protection crisis. More than 10 years of conflict continues to have a devastating impact on children inside Syria, as well as those displaced to neighboring countries. Every child in Syria has been impacted by the ongoing violence and displacement, and violations of children's rights continues by all parties to the conflict, to varying degrees. The convergence of conflict, COVID-19 and its control measures, as well as the seeming collapse of the Syrian currency is having profound effects on food security, education, and other markers of well-being. Children's mental well-being is an increasing concern as we are now seeing children resorting to taking their own lives. Almost 1 in 5 of all recorded suicide attempts and deaths in northwest Syria are children, and the last 3 months of 2020 saw an 86% jump in suicide rates from the beginning of the year. These figures emerge among constantly deteriorating conditions for people in northwest Syria, including a substantial increase in the impact of COVID-19 poverty, a lack of education and employment, domestic violence, child marriage, broken relationships, and bullying in communities that have been reeling from a decade of conflict. Mental health support is just one of the escalating needs we are seeing in northern Syria. It is estimated that 3.4 million people in northwest Syria alone are in need of humanitarian assistance and remain in areas outside of government control, only reachable with life-saving cross-border assistance. This cross-border assistance through Bab al-Hawa crossing point in northern Idlib will only become more important as it is needed to support COVID-19 vaccination efforts. First shipments of the vaccine were received a few weeks ago. Without cross-border access, vaccination efforts in northwest Syria will be all but impossible. We are particularly concerned about the impact this latest increase and accompanying lockdown will have on children, including the thousands of children who are detained in northeast Syria in camps and other detention settings because of links to ISIS. In the largest camp, Al-Hol, 43,000 out of its 65,000 total population are children. Because of COVID-19 lockdowns and curfews, they are less likely able to access medical services and facilities, affecting their health, education, and mental well-being. This crisis is made much worse by the closure of Al Yabuda border crossing point last year, cutting off all vital supplies, including medicine and food, from the most vulnerable people, including children. There is just no justification for preventing life-saving supplies from reaching people in need, particularly during a global pandemic. On top of all of that, we do want to highlight that there is also now an increased concern around water scarcity and how that is also impacting multiple needs across the board. Recognizing the deteriorating situation in northern Syria and escalating humanitarian needs, we offer the following recommendations for the Government of Canada. First, it is imperative that life-saving aid continues to reach millions in need in northwest Syria, and the UN Security Council should, at a minimum, renew cross-border access through Bab al-Hawa for at least 12 months. The Government of Canada should use any diplomatic influence to ensure this happens. Second, the international community should also recognize the escalating humanitarian needs in the country and increase humanitarian funding accordingly. It is shameful that the pledging conference for Syria fell so short of its target, and this gap needs to be rectified urgently. We are grateful that Canada stepped up and did not cut funding like other donors. However, additional funds could support some of the urgent mental health needs I discussed earlier. The situation in the camps in northeast Syria are challenging and no place for children to grow up. Putting even COVID-19 aside, we regularly see children die and are injured by accident. It is estimated that 9,000 foreign children are in the region, including about 25 Canadian children. So for our third recommendation, we urge the Government of Canada to increase its efforts to identify the most appropriate routes for repatriation in line with the best interests of the child. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Right on time. And now we'll move to Mr. Justin Mohammed for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, for inviting me to participate in this briefing. I'm joining you tonight from unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in Ottawa. Before I begin my testimony, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Library of Parliament analysts who serve this committee, a role that I once held and remember very fondly. Mr. Chair, I intend for my testimony this evening to be an update to that which Amnesty International provided at the Foreign Affairs Committee exactly 2 months ago today regarding detention camps in Northeast Syria, an important international human rights issue that, as you know, directly implicates Canadian citizens. Let me begin with the positive. In mid-March, a Canadian child was allowed to return to Canada from a camp in Northeast Syria. After exiting that country, she is reported to have received consular services to facilitate her travel from Iraq to Canada, including the provision of travel documents. Last week, Minister Garneau stated that he would be investigating how G7 countries have approached the question of repatriating their nationals from the prison camps in the Northeast. This is also a very welcome development, and Canada could look to US leadership in this regard. Not only has the US repatriated its citizens, but it has also encouraged other countries to do the same and has even offered to help with this task. Regrettably, this is where the good news comes to an end. The humanitarian situation facing the people who are arbitrarily and indefinitely detained in Al Hol and Al Roj camps has not improved. 45 Canadian citizens, of whom roughly 24 are children, remain in squalid camps that the UN experts have qualified as potentially amounting to torture or other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment under international law. Such human rights violations are among the most serious, with their prohibition constituting preemptory norms of international law. In the case of children, such acts are just downright unconscionable. And yet Canadians continue to languish there, but it is not for want of a responsive policy framework. The consular manual boldly proclaims the torture or mistreatment of Canadian detainees is not tolerated. Consular officials must, quote, promptly advise the minister in writing of credible information indicating torture and the deputy minister in cases of mistreatment. Although prompt is undefined, a period of 3 months was deemed by the Auditor General to be unacceptable. Yet this group of Canadians has been in detention for over 2 years. The policies further provide that where such mistreatment concerns arise, a consular ad hoc working group on torture and mistreatment should assess whether the allegations are valid and advise on the management of these cases. Amnesty International has been informed that the minister has been advised of allegations of torture and mistreatment in Syria, and that the ad hoc working group has been convened. Unfortunately, we do not know what advice the ad hoc working group has provided. Our request to know when the minister was advised of the torture allegations and the outcome of those assessments has been refused. An access to information request about the provision of consular services to the detained Canadians remains unanswered after 1 year of it being submitted. Questions must be answered about the application of these policies to this group of Canadian citizens who continue to be subject to daily human rights abuses with no end in sight. One Canadian detainee's mother shared a recent message from her daughter. Salam, Mom, how are you? They let out a bunch of sisters from the prisons throughout Ramadan. Some at night with no tent to go to. The one who was locked in a toilet for 3 months. The ones who ate only tea and bread. The one who got only 5 minutes of sun with their kids. The ones who had no change of clothes. The ones who were beat. Moreover, Canada's failure to resolve this situation presents a major credibility risk to many aspects of Canada's international human rights agenda. Consider, for example, Canada's recent initiative on state-to-state arbitrary detention, or its efforts to pursue the Assad regime over crimes of torture committed since 2011. Such endeavors lack principle when Canada allows its own citizens to be held in arbitrary and indefinite detention in conditions that may constitute torture. Similarly, Minister Garneau has said that Canada's feminist foreign policy will be announced this spring. How can Canada promote a foreign policy based on gender equality when turning its back on vulnerable Canadians in Syria, many of whom report or have been threatened with gender-based violence? Mr. Chair, in our previous testimony, Amnesty International offered 4 recommendations, and I won't go over them for the sake of time. But I would conclude by offering one recommendation to this committee, which has admirably called out serious international human rights violations in so many contexts. Do not allow the violations in Northeast Syria to escape your condemnation. It is rare that the mandate of this committee should overlap with human rights abuses suffered directly by a group of Canadian citizens, and Amnesty International encourages this committee to seize the moment to advocate on their behalf. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mohammed, and welcome back home to committee. And it was great to hear about your history here and your work on the Hill. We're going to move now to questions from members. Members, looking at the time, we will only have one round of questions. It'll be 7 minutes per member from each of the parties, and we're going to begin with Ms. Vanden Belde for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will split my time with Mr. Sidhu. And I thank all of the witnesses for your incredible expertise and testimony today, much of it very startling. I did have some questions, but I want to start just by following up on something that Mr. Crowdy said in your testimony, because I've been on this committee now for a number of years. I worked in international development all over the world in some of the most dangerous places. I had never heard something that you said, which is incredibly alarming to me, which is about children committing suicide. I think you mentioned something like, I can't remember the statistic, but can you elaborate on that? Because that is something that I don't think we have very often heard in situations like this. If you could tell us what is causing that and what can we do about it?
Thank you. Yeah, so perhaps allow me to expand. Going back to that issue of how we recognize at Save the Children, and certainly I think it reflects on sort of the wider international community, how Syria has been in conflict for 10 years currently. And as you might imagine, that has a long-term and protracted impact on the well-being of children themselves. That's the first one, which is that there has been no end to the plight. And you can imagine how this sort of happening day in and day out, on the one hand, it deepens the trauma that they have. That's the first point. The second point is sort of a salient issue that we've picked up on, whereby even Syrian children overseas in different locations also voice how they simply don't want to return to Syria because for them it evokes images of, say, horror and further trauma. So the whole concept of sort of the post-traumatic stress disorder that these children are facing and the up-and-coming generations is fairly significant. And for us at Save the Children, we want to put that at sort of the forefront of the durable solutions perspective that this specific group needs. And especially when we're talking about durable solutions for the Syrian population, this angle or this element of mental health and psychosocial support is absolutely critical.
I can maybe just add one of the reasons for the jump recently is just the surge of COVID cases and the associated lockdowns, which means children are at a school, which is often a safe space, a place where we see here in Canada, mental health is really affected by that. And also it limits the ability of organizations to deliver mental health supports when there's lockdowns as well and the impact of COVID. So that's one of the reasons for the recent surge in the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was actually my next question, which is the impact of COVID and also some of the measures that may have been taken to try to curb COVID-19. And I would perhaps go back to both of you, either one of you and also Ms. Gladding to answer that. And just be aware that I've only got about a minute and a half for that answer, and then I want to give it to my colleague.
Sure, I can continue quickly, and then maybe Lindsay, if you wanted to add anything from World Vision. I think the huge thing, schooling is a huge thing. The closing of schools. We run safe spaces programs in schools, which are a really great way to do outreach to children that have had a lot of trauma, as well as the lockdowns, which just makes when children need to go access services, they cannot do that as well. So that's making it harder to reach them and making us think of more innovative ways to do that, which is part of the reason for the surge. But Lindsay, please add.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would add too is that, again, the fear of COVID-19 infection is also hampering people's willingness to reach out for services when they need them, really feeling like they have limited mobility and aren't able to reach out even when services are available.
Thanks. I'll give it to Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our witnesses for sharing your insights and taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this evening. Ms. Gladding, As you know, the government is committed to helping making a real difference in Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon, committing over $4 billion since 2016. And as you highlighted in Budget 2021, we provided roughly $527 million in 2021 to 2022 to extend Canada's Middle East strategy. It's proposed in the budget. In line with our feminist policies, we are seeing strong results, especially for women and girls, and focusing on continuing to support vulnerable populations. And along those lines, my question to you, Ms. Gladding, is what are the major protection needs, particularly among women and girls, and how are they being addressed in this crisis?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. I think what we are definitely seeing is that there's very real threat and incidents of sexual assault and rape. And so, as I said in my opening remarks, every girl that we spoke to in our assessment told us that they are living with the fear of sexual assault and rape. And so ensuring that we have resources to be able to provide services, to provide prevention and protection for women and girls, that certainly is top of mind for us in the work that we're doing. I think, again, generally access to basic services, to clean water, to food. I mean, these are things that are certainly not unique to women and girls, but certainly are incredibly vulnerable to lack of resources and the impact that is having. I would say, again, while we are certainly encouraged by continued Canadian government support for our operations, the allocation to Global Affairs Canada is quite small when considering the overall support and as part of our Middle East strategy. And so, the more resources that we could invest in ensuring that we can meet the needs of women and children, as you said, we're making good progress, but the needs are continuing to far outstrip the resources available.
Thank you. And I've got 30 seconds left, so I'll try to get this in there. Back to you, Ms. Gladding. Are beneficiaries and local delivery partners, including local women organizations, involved in decision-making related to the design, delivery, and monitoring of some of these programs? Just really quickly.
Absolutely. So everything that we do in Northwest Syria is done in partnership with local organizations. World Vision and organizations like us are very much committed to strengthening the capacity of local Syrian civil society, and all of our support is done in partnership.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll move to MP Chu for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Ms. Diaf. Ms. Diaf, you mentioned that there are estimated dozens of Canadians being held and detained in northern Syria, and like over 20 of them are children, almost like guilty by association. And then later on, you also mentioned that their identity have not been able to confirm without counsel or access and assessment. So I wonder, how do we estimate how many men, women, and children that are Canadians by nature?
Thank you for your question. So, these are the figures that we have learned from both humanitarian organizations on the ground. The Kurdish-led authorities as well have identified those are individuals who, we know that there are, of the adults, there are, 8 Canadian men, roughly 13 Canadian women. So these are Canadians that, certainly the government knows of their whereabouts. They're Canadian citizens, they're children. Many of them were born in Syria. So, during, the reign of ISIS, and so have no birth certificates, et cetera, but they're certainly eligible for Canadian citizenship based on their parents' Canadian nationality. And so, those are the figures. There may actually be more than the number that I mentioned, right, simply because there may be dual nationals here that are not reported.
You mentioned that counsel access have not been provided. These places, many of them are actually controlled by non-state actor. You also mentioned that too. Will Canadians, counselor staff will be provided access to places like that in order to provide the assistance or even identify their identities and even repatriation?
Well, the Kurdish-led authorities, the non-state actor that is running these camps, has a line of communication with the Canadian government. We've been told repeatedly that the Canadian government does ask the Kurdish-led authorities about the well-being of Canadians there. The Kurdish-led authorities certainly want these Canadians repatriated back. They would facilitate consular access through video, through phone, etc. But it really is a matter of political will, whether Global Affairs Canada wants to provide direct assistance to these Canadians, provide them with travel documents, verify citizenship of children who are now stateless. And so really, essentially, it's an issue of political will. There are means, creative solutions to providing consular assistance to this group of Canadians. We've seen dozens of countries, similarly with no consular presence in Syria, do exactly the same thing, repatriate their nationals, provide them with consular assistance. There is a Canadian, consulate in Erbil, certainly that could facilitate that. There's a special envoy to Syria that's based in our embassy in Beirut. So there really is a number of mechanisms in place to provide consular assistance without physically being present in Syria, as long as there's political will to do so.
Ms. Alain, I was wondering if you could actually share with the committee here, the subcommittee, how other countries' experience are like that are more successful. I heard about the U.S. being one of the successful example, and they are offering even services to Canada or other countries. So, what are the other successful countries' experience are like?
Sure.
Repatriating their citizens.
Yeah. So we have a significant number of countries making extraordinary efforts to ensure the return of their nationals. And I have firsthand with my team.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, sorry. It looks like the audio, it's quite weak. I don't know if it is just my headphone or.
Okay. I could hear well, but I don't know if others are having some issues.
Is that better? Can you hear me now? You want me to speak? Will I speak more loudly?
Can you let us know, where is your mic located?
It's right here. It's in my.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you can hear me, Chair, or it's just.
I can hear you, but it sounds like MP Chu's having some issues. I don't know if
it seems like MP Sadu also.
Also
is having
okay.
some problem. Yeah, I wonder if the translator. I mean, I can hear it, but if the translator is having some problem, Clark, then we probably need to fix that first. Looks like
clerk looks like he's speaking
he's
to
busy.
somebody. Yeah.
Chair, do you want me to proceed at least so you have a record of the other countries' efforts, or you want me to hold?
Well, let's just hold if some of the members can't hear. Clerk, as the interpretation, how are they with the sound?
He is not muted.
I don't. Clerk, I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Mr. Chair, I apologize for that. But if I can't hear you, perhaps no one can hear anyone.
I can hear the clerk, but we were wondering if witnesses' audio it's good enough for translation. Therefore, we could actually continue. But I personally have no problem.
Okay, Mr. Alexis having issues also.
I am being told.
Mr. Chair, I believe that it's the first time that this has happened. I have had no problem with translation, but you are all having trouble directly. So I cannot say, Mr. Chair, for now. The interpreter is saying that everything is going fine and that since the beginning it's been fine. Okay.
So MP Chu, the interpreters are fine.
Okay, then I'm okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you, MP Chu. Just to say, so there are a number of countries.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I do have to intervene.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. It's just changed. Now I've just been told that it's not possible.
Are giving me the feedback that it's not adequate quality for them at present. I'm not sure if something has changed with the professor's setup, but
okay, we'll have to move on to another witness for your questions, MP Chu.
Okay, my next question is for Mr. Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed, thank you for coming again. It's been reported that Turkey, being the country that border on Syria's northern area, and it probably has the most influence in that area. It's been reported that Turkey unlawfully detains and transports captured proxy fighters from Syria to Turkey for prosecution. Many of them have been sentenced, often including life without parole, on top of abhorrent prison conditions. Could you share with us the extent of this practice?
Thank you, MP Chu, for this question. I know that Amnesty International has some research with respect to the border region. Regrettably, I can't provide further context for that. I would be very happy to take on your question, consult with my regional colleagues who are experts in this area, and revert with a response if that would be helpful to you. But I do regret that I won't be able to provide further comment on that here.
Thank you. Perhaps you could actually submit some information to the committee. Media reports indicated that at least 25 innocent Canadian children are trapped in refugee camps not far from Turkey, and the country has launched a military offensive. I would like to ask if any witness attending the meeting today are familiar with the situations and Canadian children of Syria nature in that part of the world. Thanks. In the 30 seconds left. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I think that you mean the same Canadian children that we were speaking about earlier, because the number is exactly the same. So we know of a remaining 24 Canadian children who are, whose family members have ties to ISIS, who are detained by the Kurdish-led authorities in northeast Syria. So by this de facto authority in northeast Syria.
So they are threatened. Their safety are being threatened by the military operations.
I mean,
yes,
certainly.
Thank you.
Certainly, yes.
Thank you, MP Chu. I did add over 2 minutes to your time for the time that we lost.
Appreciate
and now
it.
we're moving to MP Alexis Brunel-Duceppe.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here with us today. It's highly appreciated, and it is a subject of concern very much now. So thank you for being there. First of all, I'm going to ask the question of Ms. Gladding, but it is also open to the other witnesses if anyone else would like to add something afterwards. I know that there has been a Canadian investigation that showed that Turkey had used equipment and drones for surveillance and for targeting in Syria. It's Canadian equipment. It is perhaps a little bit out in left field as a question, but I wonder if the rules changed last month for selling arms to Turkey, and is it too little too late?
Best place to answer that myself, but I would certainly open the floor to other witnesses who may be able to speak to that.
Is there anyone who has an opinion on the subject? Very well. Listen, I tried. I said it was out in left field, so I have the impression that nobody really wants to commit on that subject, and that's fine. Listen, could someone explain to me, how Turkey's military operations in Syria violate rights protected by international humanitarian rights and international human rights? There's no witness that would like to answer that question. Okay, I think Ms. Line wants to answer. That would be nice. Go ahead, Ms. Line. I can hear you, Mr. Chu. I don't hear you, but I can hear you.
Great. So I just would make two remarks to the question by the MP. The first is about the uses of technology, and just to say that the United Nations Special Procedures remains deeply concerned about the use of surveillance and data technology in Northeast Syria, including its application to Canadian and other third country nationals. A formal letter has been sent to Your Excellency's governments on that particular point, on the collection of biometric data from persons detained in Northeast Syria, including Canadian nationals. So that issue is live, it is prescient, and we are deeply concerned with the sharing of that data, particularly on children, with other security forces and with third parties as yet, the other third party actors in the state. As regards international humanitarian law, it is profoundly clear that we have overlapping human rights and humanitarian law application, which is applicable to Turkey also as a state party engaged in this conflict zone. That particularly includes the law of occupation in those parts of Syria in which Turkey exercises effective control, including detention sites. And that includes the full application of the Fourth Geneva Convention to the detention of third country nationals, including Canadian nationals. This is an issue that is, to say the least, extremely sensitive, and it is one that the mandate I hold is apprised of and deeply concerned about, specifically the detention of third country nationals by states in Northeast Syria, not only by non-state actors.
Merci.
Thank you very much for having answered that question. It's very important. Ms. Nieuweline, it's very appreciated. The organizations and observers of human rights indicate that human rights situations in Turkey have deteriorated considerably since legislative measures have been adopted against terrorism in 2018. We're aware of that. Now, perhaps, Ms. Nieuweline, could you explain the impact of the legislative measures against terrorism on human rights in Turkey?
Thank you for the opportunity. I will briefly state that my mandate has been in direct public communication with the Turkish government on its terrorism legislation, but most recently in the last 4 months, its adoption of countering terrorism finance legislation, which is being used to directly target civil society, human rights defenders, and those who dissent from the government. We've made clear that the use of terrorism measures against civil society is a breach of international law. It is in fact a distortion of why we have counterterrorism measures in the first place. And I am deeply concerned that we have a number of governments, and this has been explicitly stated by my office to Turkey, that are misusing counterterrorism legislation to undermine legitimately protected action, freedom of expression, speech, assembly, family life, right to participate in public affairs, by invoking the terminology of terrorism in order to have legitimacy and cover for actions that are inconsistent with international law.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
1 minute.
Parfait.
Great. So I'll continue on this point. We talked about anti-terrorism measures. What are the main targets of the legislative counter-terrorist measures? And I'm weighing the words. I underline the word targeted. What are the main targets of these anti-terrorist measures?
In Turkey, are you asking me?
Yes.
And in Turkey or more broadly?
No, Turkey.
Well, in Turkey, yes, in Turkey.
So specifically, and I'm happy to share the UN's communications on this issue because the letter is public. The target is civil society. The target are dissenters. The target are those who disagree with government. And we have raised these issues not only with Turkey, but also with the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we're moving to our last questioner, MP McPherson, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to deeply thank all of our witnesses for being with us today. This is harrowing testimony to be hearing, and it's not the first time we've heard that at this committee. And so I do thank you for sharing it with us again. It's very important. I want to start, I think, by looking at some of the testimony that we've heard tonight. So I thought maybe I could start with you, Miss Neolin. I'm sure I've not said your name correctly. I apologize. You spoke of the fact that Canadian nationals, are being held by non-state actors, and that is in fact against international law. It contravenes the law. Is that? I'm going to ask a few questions just to make sure we have it on the record and it is clear. Is that accurate?
When I say yes, because these individuals, Canadian nationals, have been subject to no legal process for their detention. They are being held arbitrarily in conditions that we believe meet the threshold for torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment. That is not allowable, whether it's a state or a non-state actor. That is not allowable either under international humanitarian law, if we apply Protocol 2 or Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions, and it's clearly inconsistent with international human rights law.
So in your opinion, at this point, Canada is in contravention of, say, for example, on the rights of the child?
Canada and all of the other 57 states who have failed to repatriate their nationals is in clear breach of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child has explicitly found on this issue, not specific to Canada, but in relation to other nationals, that the continued arbitrary detention of children in these camps is a breach of the convention.
Thank you. Ms. Dief, you spoke about the fact that currently Canada is in effect finding the Canadian nationals in Syria as being guilty by association, and that is in fact against international human rights law. So could you just expand upon the fact, is Canada is it breaking international law?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, so what I said earlier was by detaining family members, the women and children who, simply because of their familial ties with male ISIS suspects, that is collective punishment. These are individuals who, certainly the children are first and foremost victims who should bear no responsibility for the actions of their parents. And certainly, many of the adults may themselves be victims as well. The women may have been trafficked, into Syria. They may be victims of ISIS themselves, as is possible for the men. And so, yes, certainly Canada's in breach of international law by continuously allowing for Canadian nationals to be arbitrarily detained and indefinitely without taking concrete steps to, ensure their safety and well-being.
And one of the things that I think that you had spoken about, Mr. Mohammed, is the idea that when we see that we are very clearly in contravention of international acts and regulations, that we are very clearly not aligned with international humanitarian and human rights law, that there is an enormous credibility risk that the Canadian government faces. Could you talk a little bit more about that the risk to our reputation, the risk to our credibility, the risk to our ability to play a meaningful role around the world, stopping similar atrocities around the world?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think that the challenges that are raised by these international human rights violations, the ones that have been mentioned by the previous speakers, already set the context for that. So whenever Canada is going to be standing up about these international human rights obligations in the international community and demanding action in other countries take action on these questions, there will be a credibility deficit. And one of the things that I mentioned in that context was the recent initiative around state-to-state arbitrary detention. How can Canada be speaking with a powerful international voice about the question of arbitrary detention when it has the capacity to end the arbitrary detention of Canadian citizens in Northeast Syria and unfortunately is not taking action? Same is true, of course, of the other example that I brought around a feminist foreign policy. We have a situation here in which some of the acts that Ms. Deef just mentioned could have taken place. We don't know entirely the context, but we do know that the violations that they're undergoing right now are ones that include gender-based violence. So how can Canada be on the international stage promoting a feminist foreign policy when the gender-based violence that's being visited upon Canadian citizens in these camps has not been addressed, and it is entirely in the government of Canada's possibility to address them. This is a real credibility on our foreign policy risk, and something that I think absolutely this subcommittee is squarely in the position to raise.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking for me because what I see is Canadians being justifiably proud of our past and the things that we've done in the past to promote human rights around the world, and to see our reputation be so damaged and so at risk, I think is really heartbreaking. One last thing I just thought I would ask you, Mr. Mohammed, if I could. This is the International Human Rights Subcommittee. Do you have any concerns about the subcommittee's ability to call out international human rights abuses that are happening by our own government?
Not at all. I think that the mandate of this committee is to deal with international human rights violations. And yes, it is mentioned in the mandate that is primarily focused outside of violations that take place in Canada. But of course, these violations are taking place outside of Canada. It is very rare that we have a situation in which a group of Canadian citizens would be subject to international human rights violations outside of Canada. This is absolutely something that the committee should take up, and that looking again at the previous statements that have been made on so many human rights issues around the world, it would be a real shame in the view of Amnesty International for this to escape the same and requisite attention. It would be quite frankly, something that would show a lack of parallel in looking outside of Canada to ensure that those international rights are respected, but not for Canadian citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, and that will conclude this session. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing before us, for answering our questions, for your statements. And members, we are going to now suspend for 5 to 10 minutes as we get ready for the second panel. Provide all comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds in your question time left, I'll put up this sign, signal you. For those that require interpretation, English or French, it's available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. And please note to everyone that screen captures and photos are not permitted. I'd now like to welcome our, I'd say witnesses, but we're not sure, but one witness anyway. We have with us tonight Juan Papier, American Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch. And Mr. Papier, you will have 6 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is an honor for me to appear before this committee on behalf of Human Rights Watch to discuss the situation in Colombia. This meeting, I must say, could not have taken place at a more timely moment. Colombia is living the highest levels of social unrest in recent decades. Since April 28, thousands of Colombians have taken the streets in cities across the country to protest a proposed tax reform. The government withdrew the tax reform days later, but the demonstrations continue against other government policies. While some demonstrators engaged in serious events of violence, most have been peaceful. Human Rights Watch has a team of researchers currently documenting the situation. We have received reports of 47 deaths since the protests began. In at least 10 cases, initial evidence suggests that the police officers may be responsible. We have also documented several cases of beatings, arbitrary detention, and even sexual violence against women protesters. But the situation in Colombia is not only worrying in these demonstrations. Violence by armed groups, including guerrillas, groups involving drug trafficking, groups that emerged from the FARC guerrillas and others, has intensified in recent years in Colombia. While the national homicide rate has decreased, some remote areas across the country have a serious risk of returning to the levels of violence that existed prior to the 2016 peace accord with the FARC guerrillas. 2020 was the year with the highest number of human rights defenders killed in Colombia, at least since the signing of the peace accord. 182 human rights defenders were killed last year, according to the country's ombudsperson's office. These figures make Colombia one of the countries with the highest number of human rights defenders killed globally. Additionally, according to UN figures, there were 76 massacres in 2020. That is the highest figure since 2014. Human Rights Watch documented in a report we released on February 2020 that most of the mechanisms to protect people in these vulnerable communities have serious shortcomings or are barely functional. So the protection by government entities to these to people at risk of facing abuses by armed groups is very limited. We presented the findings of our report to President Iván Duque, the President of Colombia, and provided him with a list of concrete recommendations to address this issue. Unfortunately, however, we have seen no indication that he and his government are willing to change course. Members of the committee, I welcome this important meeting at a critical time for Colombia. The situation in the country, both in cities where people are demonstrating and in rural areas, is worrying and needs international scrutiny, including from Canadian authorities. I will leave my presentation here, and I'm happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Papier. And now we are going to, I don't think our other witness is still ready, clerk, to be able to make a statement. Clerk? No? No. Okay, so we are going to move to questions. Our first question will be MP Sidhu for.
Actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. in the seconds between my answer and now, he's rejoined us. So I'm going to bring him back in the meeting.
Okay. Technology is a bumpy road. So, so you're saying Mr. Guzman is coming on right now? Okay. Okay. You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Guzman. No, we cannot hear you, Mr. Guzman. We cannot hear you.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
We'll work on this again in the background.
Sure. Okay. So we're moving to questions from members, and we'll begin with MP Sidhu for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Papier and Mr. Guzman, for being here today. Thank you for sharing those insights, Mr. Papier, and it's very important for us to hear from you. My question to you is how can Canada best support the leadership efforts of women, social leaders as defenders of human rights? If you can provide some insight into that. I think you're on mute there.
Thank you. This is a very important question. I think there are two important aspects. First, public diplomacy works in Colombia and is very important. When we released our report, we had a meeting with the president, but we also had a response from high-level authorities who seemed to be uninterested about the issue. But at the same time, we had phone calls from mid-level, well-intended officials who said, who said this is very important because it empowers those of us who wants to do things the right way. So I think my first message is public diplomacy and speaking out about the concerns and the human rights situation is very important. Secondly, there are some government institutions who are doing a decent job in Colombia and are worth supporting with assistance by the Canadian government. For example, there is a unit in the Attorney General's office, the Special Investigations Unit, which is doing a good and decent job. There's still room for improvement, but it's doing a decent job in investigating cases of murder, of killings of human rights defenders. And finally, of course, there are lots of important women's rights groups in Colombia that deserve support, that deserve recognition, and that deserve funding. They do a very valuable, often very brave job, and deserve to be supported by the Canadian government.
Thank you for that. And it's very important you mentioned that women-led organizations are doing tremendous work. I know Canada is implementing roughly $5.5 million into a project called Women's Voice in Leadership. It's providing financial and technical support to 16 rural, Indigenous, and Afro-Colombian women's rights organizations and networks, for 5 years. So it's definitely important that we continue supporting these women-led organizations. Mr. Papier, what are the unique challenges and risks for visible minority and Indigenous community leaders? I mentioned the support there, but I'd like to hear more from you.
Look, indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by the violence in Colombia. If you compare the figures of human rights defenders killed in Colombia, although 3% of the population in Colombia is indigenous, more than 15% of the human rights defenders killed in recent years were members of indigenous communities. You can find similar figures when it comes to Afro-Colombian communities. They're disproportionately affected by the levels of poverty in the country. They're disproportionately affected as well by the levels of violence by armed groups.
Thank you for that. And then in the months and years ahead, what do you see as key opportunities for social leaders? What do you have to say on that?
key would you mind clarifying your question?
Yes. So you see this turmoil, you see violence. Where do you see these visible minority groups or indigenous community leaders fit into this scenario? What can they do to help?
This is a very important question. The indigenous communities are doing an invaluable work. They are essentially risking their life to fight drug trafficking, to fight armed cartels, and to make sure that they are not operating in their territories. That's exactly the reason why they're being killed. So their leadership is fundamental for Colombia. These indigenous and Afro-Colombian leaders play the role that state authorities should be playing in their rural and remote communities. Without them, there wouldn't be, most people would have nowhere to turn when they have their rights violated, or they would have nowhere to turn for protection. So their role in these communities is indispensable. The challenge is precisely because they are doing this job, and that is the reason why international pressure is needed on the Colombian government to make sure that these indigenous and Afro-Colombian leaders are being protected.
Thank you for that. And wanted to hear more about your views on the implementation of peace agreement between the government of Colombia and then the FARC, if you can provide some insights into that as well.
Yes. The peace agreement is a 400-page agreement with different chapters and sections, and it's a very complex. It's probably the most complex peace agreement in recent history. And essentially, what is happening in Colombia is that the Duque administration is implementing the parts of the agreement it agrees with, while neglecting, ignoring, or dragging its feet to implement the parts of the agreement it does not agree with. So the government is certainly committed to implement parts of the agreement that concern the demobilization of the FARC. It's certainly committed to implement parts of the agreement that have to do with reintegrating FARC fighters into society. I think they're doing a commendable effort in that regard. But when it comes to other aspects of the agreement, for example, the mechanisms created in the accord to protect human rights defenders, to protect communities at risk, the efforts are completely weak, insufficient, and that's part of the reason why we are seeing an increase in violence and we're seeing so little protection for communities at risk.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And I think I only have like 20 seconds left, but just want to say thank you. I really want to say appreciation from all the witnesses, from all the members here, and for you taking the time. And I think we want to hear from Mr. Guzman. I hope he's able to join soon as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you, MP Sidhu. And I believe Mr. Guzman is going to try again. He's got a new mic, clerk. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Guzman, can you unmute, please? If we could see if it works.
No.
It is not working. I am moving to MP Reid for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the event Mr. Guzman does come back online during the period...
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Okay, so was that good enough, clerk? I'm not sure. It didn't sound great, but
I'm not sure. But
Mr. Guzman, can you unmute and please speak?
Oui.
Yes, can you hear me? Mr. Guzman, you're a bit too close to the microphone. Yes, I'm close to the microphone. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. I want to talk to you about Colombia and on the human rights crisis that we're experiencing now in Colombia.
more than 4 or 5 minutes. You could start.
Okay, je vais.
Okay, I will summarize what was prepared because I had prepared more. I would like to thank the Honorable Committee on Human Rights. Thank you very much for the invitation. We represent Colombians that reside in Canada and a number of organizations that collaborate with us concerning Colombia now. Since the election of Mr. Duque, there's been a peace agreement with the FARC, and in that position we've seen how thousands of social leaders have been murdered without the government doing anything or taking any measures to rectify the situation. Since 2019, there's been demonstrations, but because of the pandemic, they've been sent home and condemned to be isolated in quarantine, and Colombians have lost their quality of life. And we hope that, well, there's about 42% roughly of the statistics on Colombia are at the 42% of the people earn less than $5 per day. They're poor, and as a consequence of bad management of the pandemic, because nobody had a guaranteed income during the pandemic that lasted for 6 months. And after that, the government's proposed a reform, a tax reform, which put 19% of taxes on basic products, food, coffee, eggs, and so on, and even funeral services, and 41%. So people were angry about that because they were hard hit by the pandemic. And one might say that 72,000 people died during the pandemic, and the result is poverty in Colombia of 42% is very difficult for the population. And even with the third wave of the pandemic being at its peak, the population came out to demonstrate against the unfair tax reform. And on April 8th, there was a general unlimited strike and for the tax reform. And even if that dropped, there are other reforms that people disputed for health and glyphosates, and the police, the way they shot at the population who were demonstrating, and the population disputes the fact that the military was sent in against our population, and the military struck out against the demonstrators and started to shoot at the population. And according to the Human Rights Defense Organization Templars, between April 8th and May 8th, 12 women were raped by the police, and the police used women as in a state of war, and there was a peaceful city, and 548 people disappeared, and there were serious violations of the international agreement against forced disappearances. 489 people were injured, 33 people were injured in their eyes, 48 people were injured by firearms, 69 human rights defenders were attacked by the police, and the medical services offered to the demonstrators, even those people were assaulted by the police, and the UN observation mission was also subject to intimidation by the forces. On May 4th, there was a report of 19 deaths, 89 disappearances, and 846 injuries. And since that time, in Colombia, there's no longer access to an advocacy web page and social media. You've seen the effects. They show how serious the suppression is against the people and the peaceful demonstrators. and the artistic people with candles and things like that, and also the way that the police cut off the electricity and internet and caused demonstrators to disappear. It's like a dictatorship. And the approach was what they would do against an armed group, but they did this against the civilians. And they shoot, and there were paramilitary groups that walk around in the city threatening the demonstrators and the 9,000 indigenous people that my colleague referred to in Cauca. That
have a lot of opportunity during questions to be able to elaborate on what you've said in your statement. If you could just put your mic on mute, Mr. Guzman, and we're gonna move to MP Reid for 7 minutes.
Okay. Why don't I give 1 minute of my time to Mr. Guzman to finish his intervention?
Sure.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Just to mention regarding Canada, the Europeans judge that it's important to deal with this. The U.S. spoke out against this situation that's highly violent, violence against the demonstrators. Amnesty International talked about this suppression and the militarization of cities. And Canada has very strong commercial ties with Colombia and a bilateral agreement that's economic that has existed for 10 years, and the economic consequences on human rights are very harsh for Colombians. And Canada supports this through political actions for Colombia. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marc Garneau, made a declaration about the way the police forces struck out against peaceful demonstrators, and also referred to vandalism and attacks against officials and highways being blocked. And the government of Colombia, they want to investigate the human rights violations, and it shows an incorrect interpretation of what's happening in Colombia. And there's the responsibility of the government in the serious violations of, and the vandalism was caused by government-related forces and the prevailing impunity for crimes done by the state for decades. And the Canadian government, as led by Prime Minister Trudeau, has to take its share of responsibility in this conflict and condemn this suppression while ensuring that the armed forces stop this suppression and that human rights of the participants and demonstrators are respected. And we have an observation mission that we want that to protect the lives of those who are still left. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. I think that your testimony is very important.
Address my first question to Mr. Papier, if I could, because you gave what I thought was what we would call a pregnant suggestion. Early in your testimony, you talked about the need for public diplomacy, or you said that the Colombian government is responsive to public diplomacy. That's the term you used. That seemed like an invitation to ask what you have in mind, how you feel that Canada could best engage in public diplomacy with the Colombian government.
Thank you. I think statements from the Canadian government, statements from this Congress, showing even making reference to this, the Colombian government is sensible to all of that. The Colombian government is very sensible to its reputation globally, and will take note of any statements that the Canadian government and the Canadian Congress can make of concern on the human rights situation in the country.
What does Colombia's government want its international reputation to be? What is its ideal of what it would like the world to see it as being? If I know that, I think we can better try to incentivize it properly.
The Duque administration, the Duque administration wants to be seen globally as a government that is implementing the peace accord and that is respectful to human rights, and that is a reliable partner for the United States, of course, and for Canada and for other countries in the European Union. I think that's critical in the mindset of President Duque and in the mindset of his government. And I think that's part of the reason why they are so perceptive, sensible to public diplomacy and public statements of concern.
Okay. Je vois que Monsieur Guzman.
I see that Mr. Guzman raised his hand. I think he also has a response. May I speak? Yes, you raise your hand, so I think that you have something to say. Yes, the Colombian government is completely going against the rights of the population. The government itself came out to support the armed forces after having seen clear videos of how the police and armed forces were shooting at demonstrators. That does not indicate any concern for international human rights. What it demonstrates is total hypocrisy on the international scene against Canada and the U.S., because we know that Canada is a country which promotes democracy. Even in its declaration, they said that the protection of human rights is important, and representatives in the U.S. said that we saw how the police were shooting at the demonstrators, and the president denied that the police shot at the demonstrators and denied that the demonstrators were peaceful because they had candles and there's a cultural thing in the community, and more than 40 killed by the police. This is not a political will to halt the violence. If the government wanted to halt the violence, they would already have withdrawn the military from the cities, and they would have wanted to talk to the people who are at the front lines of the demonstration. And they don't take that into account, and yet they said, the demonstrators said, it's now with solidarity of the people that we'll be able to eat, because before that we had nothing to eat. So the government does not listen to its citizens and opposes reforms, and they bought weapons and planes instead of using that money for people who suffered in the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic. It's regrettable that the Colombian government says that it wants to respect human rights when it's not the case.
I want to have one last question, if I could, to Mr. Papier. It's on the question of there's a higher level of violence against indigenous human rights defenders than other defenders, and I'm wondering what the reason is for that. Is it because they're less visible? Is it because they're in rural areas where it's harder to keep track of abuses? Is it because the public tolerates it more? What's the reason for that being an area that is particularly subject, or that group of people being particularly subject?
MP Reid, I think, Mr. Papier, you'll be able to send that in writing to the committee if you'd like to then answer that. But we have to move on, and we're moving to MP Alexis Brunel-Duceppe now for 7 minutes. Thank you.
First of all, thank you tremendously for being with us this evening. I like Colombia very much. I did a documentary there for Pierre. So, what I want to know, Mr. Guzman and Mr. Papier, thank you once again. Mr. Guzman, we often hear this said. Is it true that the demonstrators are vandals, as the president stated? Precisely. I wanted to clarify that point, because we were accused of vandalism, but we also have images that show the police dressed as civilians with sticks to fight and cause damage. And we've seen those videos. Everyone can see them. And not only that, if there are vandals, everyone deserves equal and just treatment, as international law says. Why would they shoot at the population? It's disproportionate. Why would they shoot at people on a large scale? If they're vandals, go and bring them in and bring them to justice. But their excuse of vandalism is just an excuse. which doesn't hold up. And in fact, someone from the U.S., a Democrat, said that the idea of vandalism, it's really a conspiracy theory to justify the murders going on in Colombia. But nevertheless, I do want to ask you a question that may appear, well, I would like to look at things from the other side of the coin, as they say. Why do the demonstrations continue if we're told that the tax reform fell through? Precisely because they have a health reform that privatizes the health services even more than it was. And also, there are other reforms that are part of the package. And the people are angry because the government acted violently against the population. It's the whole state acting against the unarmed population, a city under siege. It's not only the 40 people that were murdered, it's 540 people who disappeared, taken away by the police. So the people, let's say, what did they do? Do we just let things ride? Okay, we'll say we lost. Can you imagine? The mothers of those children are gone. 540 people disappeared. Oh, well, okay, we'll just leave things like that. Is that what we're going to say if the government doesn't admit its responsibility? And the military, the soldiers, these forced disappearances, this is important. They've gone well beyond that. The 44 students, and now we're talking about 540 people. Fine, I understand. And it's quite legitimate. Very likely, I would be out in the streets too. But in that case, what about the demands of the demonstrators now? Yes, the demonstrators have demanded for the army to be removed from the city and to change things with the police, because the police, well, it's a military approach. So it's an armed group. They treat them like an armed group. So they're asking for the police squadrons to be dismantled and to create a police that is more there to serve the population. And that's the second one. And the third one is the health reform, with the demonstrators who are out in the street, and they're not the ones that were invited in because the government tried to avoid a dialogue with its own political party, with the justice system, that are all saying that the government was acting correctly. So there's no criticism about the disappearances and deaths. And the last meeting was with a committee. It was a committee of the strike people, but it doesn't represent the citizens who are out in the street, because those citizens are still being left out from the strike committee. Thank you, Ms. Guzman. Mr. Papier, if possible, in your opinion, how will the government react to the international pressure? Do you have an idea of that?
I think the government has. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I think it's better. When it comes to the protest, I think the government has been sensible to international pressure. Of course, the situation in the ground continues to be dire and troubling. But we have at least begun to see a change in discourse by the Colombian government. It's starting to raise the issue of police violence. But what is needed is a more unequivocal condemnation of these instances of police violence, and especially serious steps to end these instances of violence, of course. I think if there is international scrutiny, there is pressure, we can help make sure that President Duque will change course. Otherwise, we're likely to see more and more people being killed. We as Human Rights Watch are getting reports of 2 or 3 people at least being killed every night. And that is part of the reason why this international pressure is needed, I would say, urgently.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Papier. Mr. Guzman, I feel that you're passionate about it. I would like to give you the floor. Do you have a message to deliver? Yes, thank you very much. Precisely, I have a message for all the people who are mobilized around the world, because we have a lot of Colombians and organizations for defending rights advocacy groups around the world to mobilize in solidarity with Colombia, and I would like to thank them, and we need to always bring up the pressure because that has to halt. It has to stop. It's a carnage under this open sky before everybody's cameras. We have to keep up the pressure, and thank you very much for the time that you have devoted to this. I'm not talking for my own behalf, but on behalf of hundreds of Colombians that are demonstrating today in Canada, and the hope that the Canadian government will have a response and give a clear response given the situation that is particularly difficult.
Et Monsieur le Président, juste vous...
And Mr. Chair, I would just like to mention that I will have a point of order at the end. I don't want the witnesses to see that. Thank you.
We'll move to MP McPherson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses very much for coming here and sharing this with us. I have been speaking to a number of different people who are really quite concerned, people from Colombia, people who are concerned for the people of Colombia. And so having your testimony and being able to put forward a report and share information with parliamentarians is vital for us to be able to support the people of Colombia at this time. So thank you very much. I have a few questions, and I'm going to start, if I could, with Mr. Papier. First of all, from your perspective, from your understanding, does the Colombian government have an official list of people who have died, who have been injured, who have disappeared as a result of the violence experienced in the last few days?
Thank you. Yes, from my experience, yes. We are in close communication with the prosecutors who are investigating the cases, with the Attorney General's office in Colombia, with the Ombudsperson's office in Colombia. And there is a list of people who have been reported as killed, and then there is a list of people disappeared or people missing. Many of these people missing have fortunately been found recently. But there is certainly a list. It may be incomplete. It may have some shortcomings, but there's certainly a list of work.
Okay, and of that, do you know how many investigations are currently underway into the violence by the police, by the military?
The Attorney General's office has opened investigations into the 47 people killed. And according to their own investigations, only 13 of these deaths appear to be related with the protests. And they have said publicly that they have evidence identifying the specific police officer involved in 3 cases. So far, 2 police officers have been arrested. Of course, we would hope for much more, given that there are videos showing specific cases where protesters were killed.
Thank you. And then one last question for you, if I could. I know that we did hear from my colleague from the Liberal Party earlier on today in terms of the impacts on women in Colombia. Can you, we know that when there are crises like this, that women are disproportionately impacted. Can you share any data, any stories, any information that you might have with regards to the impact this crisis has had on women?
Just to clarify, do you mean the protests?
Yes. And the crackdown by the military and the police forces.
Of course. We have documented several cases of sexual violence by police officers against women. And that's certainly a risk for some women who are protesting. And I think that's probably the most visible way in which this disproportionate impact on women is manifested in this crisis. There are probably other ways in which this effect is also reflected. We have seen reports of women being threatened with being raped. Or other similar cases, and of course, women being particularly afraid of being detained because of the risk of sexual violence that may potentially entail. That's the information I can share based on our research so far.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Did you have something you'd like to add to that?
Oui,
Yes, well, precisely, if I may, regarding the search, the justice organizations in Colombia cannot be trusted, and the president, they're unable to bring to light these massacres, and at this time of year, there are 27 massacres that have occurred in a country, and the justice system in Colombia is not competent because they're tied to the government, and they made a statement to say that the government was doing its best efforts to improve the situation, when we know that the government sent those, they said to the army, they told the army, not only them, but the head of the party wrote that the police and the army had to shoot the population. And after writing that, then it happened. The police, and they shot at the population. So I don't trust the Colombian government. And as far as justice is concerned, there's no proof that there's any justice. So in the report on impunity, Colombia has the highest rate of impunity because human rights complaints are not handled seriously. And also the situation of women. We know the case of a woman who was a professor or teacher who was raped by the police and impaled and cut in pieces. And all of this was done by the police simply because she was against the reform and demonstrated with other teachers. So these are the kinds of things that we know that are not going to be brought to light, because in Colombia, it's been 20 years, and only after the International Court or the Human Rights Court brings an edict that they'll recognize that these things have happened. I'm sorry.
Fine testimony. And one of the things that is so sad about this is we know the important role that women played in the peace process in Colombia. The world saw that the important role that women played, and to know that this is the result is very heartbreaking. I have one very quick question to ask you, if I could, Mr.
Thank you, MP McPherson. That's the time. But you know what? We do want to thank, on our collective behalf, thank the witnesses for your courage, for your bravery, for coming forward, for sharing these stories, for answering the many questions. We thank you so much for that. So everybody, just on our behalf of this committee, thank you so much. And
thank you.
I would like to speak to you. I know a number of members have reached out to me, and as you just heard from our witnesses, we had some very courageous people that have come before us here today, and I wanted to make sure that those witnesses had the time to be able to, as again, share their stories and be able to answer our questions through the time that we had set through our notice of meeting for today. And on that, I know that members have brought forward a sensitive issue that needs to be discussed. But it is very sensitive, and it concerns people, and we would want to do something like that in camera. We'd also want to be able to provide justice to it. So I know members would like to speak to the issue that has been brought to my attention by a couple of members. But at this time, also a number of members. One moment.
Point of order.
MP Duceppe. So a number of members have brought this forward, but a number of members have also explained to me and have reached out and have said that this is Ramadan time. They have commitments for this evening that they need to get to. We are at our 8:30 time. What I will say is that we will make time. We will make time.
Point of order,
we will.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. President. Point up.
Point of order.
MP Brunel Duceppe.
Give me the floor.
MP Brunel Duceppe, you do not have the floor. Listen,
well,
so
give
members,
me the floor. Point up.
Members, what I'd like to, MP Brunel Duceppe, can you please respectfully mute your mic?
Okay, then you
mute your mic, MP Brunel Duceppe, please, respectfully. Okay, so to actually speaking about respect, it was respect for the witnesses that we had here today. respect for the members at this last minute to bring something like that forward, which was very sensitive. So what I'm recommending to the members, and we'll see what the members have to say. This works by consensus, this committee. I would say that in our next meeting, we will carve out time in camera to be able to discuss this sensitive matter. That was what I am proposing to the members. We've only got a couple of minutes before we adjourn. I'm asking the members also for adjournment. It is 8:33 at this time.
Mr. Chair, will you recognize Mr. Brunel Duceppe? If not, I would like to.
I am recognizing Mr. Brunel Duceppe right now. Yes.
Ça, c'est trop gentil.
All too kind. So I took out the translation so we can talk to one another quickly. Mr. Chair, just now we wasted 3 minutes. We could have gone in camera. We need a 10-minute discussion in camera. I'm convinced that, and in fact, I don't want to talk, well, it's public. I don't want to talk about the situation that we're dealing with right now because it would compromise the security or safety of someone, and I don't want to do that. I want us to go in camera now. It'll take 10 minutes, and everyone will be happy because we'll discuss that. And I cannot believe that a human life is not worth 10 minutes of discussion right now in camera. That's all I have to say. I hope that all the members of this committee will understand the seriousness of the subject that we're now to deal with, and that everyone will agree to go in camera right away.
I'll let you know that it will take a while to go in camera. It will also take, we have resources, we have interpreters, etc., that were not prepared for this. And we did have a consensus that we would not be doing this at the start of this meeting.
On parle de vieux men.
MP Brunel Duceppe.
We're talking about human lives.
Mute your mic.
Non, je suis pas capable de mute.
I cannot mute my mic. We're talking about human lives.
Consensus, but I will move to MP McPherson.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I did actually flag this with the committee earlier on today. We did have time to organize this. You did have time to substitute in somebody for any member who wasn't able to stay. There is someone's life on the line, and you're suggesting that we will discuss this in 2 weeks. We don't even have a committee meeting next week. This is in 2 weeks from now. So that's absolutely unacceptable. I simply can't accept that. This is somebody that came before our committee, and the risk there, because they did that, is the responsibility that we have to take on, and to say that the 10 minutes it would take, or the 30 minutes, or the hour, frankly, is not worth our time, but yet we can wait 2 weeks and ask this person to wait 2 weeks. I would say that we either need to do something tonight, or we need to have an emergency meeting set up tomorrow. I think it's unbelievable that you would even suggest we wait 2 full weeks to deal with this important emergency issue.
MP McPherson, I look to the members for consensus, and I've reached out to the members, and what I've heard from the members is, of course, safety and security is paramount about doing this in camera, and that members have had commitments right after this meeting today. So I will go to, I'm not sure if it was MP Chu or MP Khalid next. I see MP Chu.
Well, thank you, Chair. And MP McPherson actually said exactly what I want to say. If necessary, I think we need to consider calling an emergency meeting to handle this. In fact, way back when we were talking about the witnesses attending the Hong Kong studies, I've already asked the committee whether we could actually have something special to accommodate for witnesses' identity and also concern for security, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not something entirely new. I would definitely think that between the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP, we are establishing a quick consensus, and I believe many of the members from the Liberals also are probably on side with us. So we'd like you to reconsider or maybe consider an alternative. Thank you.
Well, thank you, MP Chu. And it's not for me, it's for the members to decide if there is consensus. And also, speaking with the clerk and looking at what infrastructure is available, if interpretation is available, what resources are available to be able to do that. But I will move now to MP Khalid.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I thank the members for raising, this issue. And this is an issue that we've discussed a number of times in the past. It's not an issue in this instance that we can discuss by quickly going into in-camera for 10 minutes. It takes a while to get to in-camera. And I do understand that we have a lot of other issues to discuss as well, that we would benefit from a set-aside time from having this discussion. So I would propose that we set aside that extra time, we carve it out in the very near future so that we can have that important discussion about the issues that were raised by members and also the issues that have been emailed by members as well by way of motions.
Thank you, MP Khalid. I know I've got MP Reid. So a lot of this, again, I will look to the clerk if the resources are even available to be able to do this. But MP Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be very brief. The first thing I wanted to say is I'm aware of the timing of iftar. In fact, on my other computer screen, I have it up. It says iftar is 8:34 tonight, and we are past 8:34. So I am respectful of that, and I think we all should be. Having said that, and recognizing the difficulties that you have and the clerks have in terms of lining up time, could we ask that you try to set up a meeting as soon as possible, as in looking for a time tomorrow, if not tomorrow, then Thursday. And I, for one, would be willing to accept a meeting at any time. And if I can't make it, I'll make sure to get a replacement for myself. And I hope others can commit to the same thing. The importance of having the meeting is really critical. So, but I have faith in you to find the earliest possible time if we make that request to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, MP Reid, for that. And yes, I do know members have commitments tonight to Ramadan Iftar. So I'm going to go look at the clerk. We'll look to see what is available in terms of slots. And then if members are open, maybe there may be something even in the break week that we will be able to find. That way, maybe resources are available. But again, I don't know. I will have to look to the clerk and see what is available. I do know that members are sending me notes that they've got to conclude, and we need to adjourn. I've got Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Okay, I've calmed it down, Mr. Chair. I've taken a breath. I'll be calmer. Don't worry. But I'm wondering, you were aware of the situation? You knew that we wanted to discuss this today? Yesterday, we received communications from a specific organization, and I spoke to some people yesterday who were in difficulty and who were telling me that they were that they were afraid for their
now in public and not in camera, and what was said, where we just heard from some very courageous witnesses that have come before our committee right now from Colombia. So MP Brunel Duceppe, we gave them respectfully the time that we should have given them. And right now, and members, this came last minute. Members do have commitments that they have to get to. So, Monsieur Brunel Duceppe, I would ask that you would respect the members of the committee.
Why are you cutting me off? You know very well what I'm talking about. We sent you communications about this today. Heather sent you communications about that today. No. I said that I would calm down, but...
MP Brunel Duceppe, that's right. Heather sent something last minute. So what I'm saying...
First thing this morning.
What I'm saying is it was not first thing this morning.
Last minute pour vous, là, c'est...
Last minute to you is 12 hours? I don't understand.
See what resources are available to be able to provide the time that is necessary to discuss this sensitive issue.
Okay, fine. You said it. It's a sensitive issue. Now, Mr. Chair, I tell you right now, Put yourself in the position of the person we're talking about, and you know exactly whom we're talking about. Put yourself in that person's position this evening and look at what's going on and say, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
MP Khalid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really think that the more we delve into this, the more we're bound to talk about and further risk the issues that we're trying to mitigate here. So I would respectfully ask members to respect the decorum here in this meeting and to find that time to have that meeting, that very important, very necessary meeting in camera so that we can maintain the integrity and the protection of exactly what it is that we're trying to do here.
100% d'accord. Allons-y maintenant.
100% agree. Let's go with it.
So that's what we're going to do. We are going to ask the clerk to look for the resources, see as soon as possible that we can have that meeting. And I'm just going to look for the members. Is everybody available in break week? If the slot is not available this week.
Moi, je suis disponible maintenant, monsieur.
I'm available right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'm available. I'll make sure I'm
Okay.
available, or someone else can replace me.
So I'm looking for, are we going
It's life and death.
for adjournment
Yes.
of this meeting today? Okay.
Monsieur le Président, c'est...
Mr. Chair, that's a serious error you're making right now.
To urgently look for resources to be able to host an in-camera meeting.
Vous le saviez.
You knew right from the start this morning. You knew you should have.
Vous avez
Not
su,
MP
vous
Brunel
avez...
Duceppe, but that's okay. Anyway, I'm asking for adjournment. Members?
Ben, moi, je suis pas d'accord.
I don't agree. Let's go ahead right now, in camera, right now.
On parle de la vie humaine.
We're talking about a human life here.
Okay, we are adjourning the meeting.
Ah, bravo.
Bravo. Okay.